It's very hard to explain how these terrible things or like these very brutal, losing all your friends and work and stuff and being mobbed, however virtually, or being
Yeah.
kind of harassed by specific individuals for years on end. It's very hard to explain how that could result in a hopeful worldview, but somehow.
Hello, I'm Anne Snellgrove McKerracher.
And this is David McKerracher. You're listening to What's Right.
Guest with us, a dear friend of Theory Underground, Miss Nina Power. We're so happy you're here. How's it going today?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Easing into spring. It's a bit overcast here, but the general thrust is this slow, painful crawl towards some sunlight. So
yes. Yes, and it feels good. Same here. I got to wear my sandals for the first time yesterday, and I was like, oh, this is exciting. Awesome. Well, we're really excited to have you here today. We kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about the topic of nature with you as you're teaching a philosophy of nature class at Theory Underground, where we do one lecture session every month. And we can get into a little bit of the course, but Dave and I really just wanted to have more of a general conversation about nature and why you feel called to talk about that right now. At Theory Underground, we care a lot about the tenets of nature, nurture, and natality and how those all relate. And so we'd also love to hear your thoughts on those, as well as getting into why things like nature or farming, living off the grid, having children seem to be conservative coded things to do with your life today in the West. So we're hoping to get into all of that today. But Dave, I'll turn it over to you if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, a little context. Just I wanted to say we're coming from North Idaho. We just got down to Boise a couple days ago. We're packing up the house. It feels very like we're in transition from one way of life to another. We're going from the city back to the countryside, or to the rural place that I actually grew up across the street from where I grew up. And we're moving there to be with my parents as they enter their 70s. It seems very important for me and both of us because theoretically, I've been attuned to the importance of intergenerationality that liberalism breaks down, and
Mhm.
and thinking about how time energy is finite, and it differs for teenagers or people entering their 70s. It differs for them from the sort of liberal 30-year-old consumer subject, right? And so I think that all sparked this interest for us in being there for them, but also, you know, caring about nature, caring about stewardship, and so Anne just had her first week of training on the job training, like
Mhm.
getting her hands dirty on the farm. Um, so maybe she'll be able to say some stuff about that. But that's sort of the context for where we're coming from and why we were just like itching for a conversation with you.
Yeah, I mean, lots of things come to mind. I was just back with my parents in Wiltshire, which is very rural, which is where I grew up,
Mhm.
which is in the southwest of England. People probably will know it's where Stonehenge is, and Avebury and Silbury Hill, and West Kennet Long Barrow, and lots of these white horses, and lots of prehistoric stuff. It's very, very beautiful in a very muted, kind of quiet way. And of course, it's agricultural. The agricultural revolution was 30,000 years ago, at least. So it's tamed nature. I mean, of course, there are like pockets of wildness. But really, where I grew up is surrounded by farms. It was very beautiful. We saw a farmer with his two collie dogs rounding up sheep and they just had lambs. So we spent some time looking at the lambs. I put my phone away for the weekend largely. I didn't have it out with my parents. I'm also very conscious of the things that you were saying about intergenerational duty even, and how it is for my parents who are now in their late 70s. They're both very fit. But they do live in this very for their age, let's say, and but they live in this very isolated place, right? Like it's difficult to like get access to where they live. Like the nearest train station is 20 minutes away. You have to have a car. You can walk around, but like they, even getting to the shops, it takes like 30 minutes, 40 minutes walk to the nearest town. And yeah, so I'm very conscious too of what I owe my parents and obligations that I have to them. And I've said to them, if you need me and or my husband to move back and look after you, we will. And, I feel fortunate that I can work from there. They have terrible internet, but like I could write a piece and send it, it would be fine. And actually, how much I enjoyed being there with them this weekend. I really actively enjoyed it. Like it was, especially once I'd determined not to do any work, not to be on my phone at all or the internet, and just to be with them, and play games. And we went for a long walk. There's lots of quarries. They mine this beautiful stone. It's like this limestone, which is characteristic of the area. And they try to stay fit. My dad's very fit. He still runs, but they try to go for walks a lot. And I was sort of walking with them at their pace and just seeing the world as they see it. And having lived in the countryside for so long, they've been there for 50 years. They both were brought up in inner cities in Cardiff and Bristol, but they decided that they loved the countryside. They moved there when they got married, and they got married at 23, which was totally normal then, and they've been together for 55 years or something. It's crazy. It's very impressive. And they know the names of all the birds and plants and butterflies and trees, and they spend a lot of time in their garden, and I help mum water the plants, and just she's trying to save a lot of plants. Someone was getting rid of plants, and she's repotted them and planted them in her garden, and it's very beautiful to see her like trying to salvage this like life. But then the countryside is also very brutal and I have some like really quite like violent images from my youth of the things that happen to animals, and when there are kind of plagues and pyres of burning animals. And Britain has had a lot of problems with these kind of things like CJD and foot and mouth and mixie with the rabbits and Dutch elm disease, and lots of you really get this strong encounter with nature when it is when it's unhappy as well, let's say. And but I absolutely love it. I mean, you go outside, you see the crows in the field. Sometimes there are deer, there are hares, there are rabbits, there are red kites. There are just these, and they're specific, right, to the time of year, the bluebell wood. And yeah, I guess my plan is probably something similar to yours, insofar as like medium long term, I want to leave the city and just be somewhere where I can, I don't know, be like contemplative in nature, and to think there. And when we think about the philosophers who did that, those philosophers like Epicurus and who moved to the garden, there were different modes of philosophizing in this way, right? Like you can philosophize in the polis, you can philosophize, and there you're concerned with the things of man. You can be Diogenes, you can live on the scraps of the city, you can kind of mirror and mock the silly ways, the conventions of the cities. You can be like the punk living on the edge of the city. Or I think you can, embrace something like a rural life, which is consciously at a distance from the life of the city. And one of the difficult questions I think for philosophers is, if you want that kind of peace and quiet, you also need peace and quiet at the level of the kingdom or the country, right? Because it's not impossible to philosophize in wartime. I mean, Hegel finishes the phenomenology in
Mhm.
war. Hobbes is writing in the aftermath of the religious wars, but I think you need a relatively stable society in which people can live in that way. And there have been a lot of attacks on the farmers in this country. Like the government seem to have an antipathy to people who live on the land. They're trying to bring in all these taxes around inheritance, but it doesn't make any sense because farms act, they operate differently, right? It's not,
Mhm.
families inherit a farm, right? And people are being punished for continuity of like the organic tie to the land, which
Yeah.
is completely stupid. It's like not everybody lives in the same way in the same, but I suppose the bureaucratic mindset doesn't want to see that there are differences in the way that people live, and therefore they might need different,
Mm.
ways of being treated. And so a lot of farmers are very anxious at the moment, and yeah, I mean, we were reading Machiavelli's The Prince. I don't know if you guys have really studied Machiavelli. It's a sort of very brutal book in a way. It's a book of realpolitik. It's very modern in that sense, in the 15th century. It's obviously we have the popular understanding of Machiavellian as someone who is sort of scheming, and it's not quite like that. I mean, I don't think that Machiavelli is evil in that sense. But
Mhm.
what he's describing is how one must behave if one is to successfully lead, and that might include all kinds of machinations. But one thing he does say about a successful prince is that he should know the lay of the land, right? Wherever it is that he governs, whatever principality, he needs to go hunting, right? He needs to
Mm.
know the different types of countryside in his domain. And I think this is right. I think this is exactly right. You can't govern a country from the city with your spreadsheets and be like, oh, I know what's best. Oh, here's some empty land. Let's just build on that. It's like, no, like you have
Right.
no idea what you're doing. You don't understand. You don't love your country. You don't love the land. You don't love the people who are close to the land, who actually deal with extraordinary things, and being a farmer is really hard. It's a hard life. You're getting up at 4 a.m., you're dealing with
Mhm.
animals all the time, often, sickness and maintaining things. And yeah, and I suppose I'm very interested in like the difficult questions around nature, which is to do with the brutality of it. I think that the
Mhm.
liberal subject wants the smooth life, oh, here's a package of thing. Oh, like, I can buy this and that, da, 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 and I don't have to think about the process. And it's interesting, I think one of you said that the sort of nature and living off grid has become right coded because as I've always said, but when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, like it was left coded, because that suspicion of people making money off of you or consumerism or, bad food, not eating well, was a crunchy sort of lefty hangover from
Right. Yeah.
hippiness, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, there's this farmer in the United States. He lives in Virginia. His name is Joel Salatin, and he is one who, yeah, his parents wanted to be farmers. They couldn't afford land in the United States, so they moved to Venezuela and like sold chickens and kind of became the chicken kings because their chickens were so clean and healthy. But then there was a coup in the government, so they kind of were like forced back to the US and they bought a plot of land in Virginia and have basically been there ever since. So he never went to college, he just took over the farm. And his mode of farming, and Dave, maybe you can fill in my blanks here if I miss anything. But he considers himself like conservative. He's very, very religious. He does a lot of what he does in his stewardship of the land in the name of God and religion. But he cares about sustaining and maintaining the land. He cares about the nutrients of the animals that he's farming, and he respects the animalness of the animal. Like he thinks it's a shame the way that industrial animal agriculture functions. He's like, no, I respect the chickenness of the chicken and the pigness of the pig, and I try to keep them clean and happy and healthy. And then, they make this ultimate sacrifice to clean a community or to feed a community. And he is kind of taken on the name for himself of the lunatic farmer. And so I don't know what all his like personal conservative politics are, but he's been like attacked in the media. They've tried to shut down his operations in the past because, oh, your chicken processing isn't being done in the way that the bureaucracies want it to be done, even though it was like totally clean, done outdoors, everything was sanitary. Um, and yeah, it's interesting that like his policies and view towards the land and farming is seemingly so, it's very respectful. It is seemingly more liberal, progressive, even like nurturing in that way. Yet he's considered this far right lunatic, and people say, "Oh no, you can't feed a country like this. Everything has to be big and industrial." And he's like, "No, we have to feed a country this way. Look at how much more I'm able to sustain on my healthy, clean, regenerative land." So yeah, that shift from that ideology and that view being on the left to the right is really interesting. And I'm wondering if either of you have an insight on when and how that shift and that kind of distrust of our medicine, agriculture, food shifted to being more right coded.
Well, I mean, as I say, I think it's definitely in my lifetime, because when I was growing up, the left position was, yeah, like suspicion of big farming and big pharma, and like a desire that everybody have access to good food and clean water, and that was because it was healthy. So it feels like something like health has shifted, politically. And I mean, one thing that has occurred to me over the years is how modernity itself is understood by the left and the right, if we want to maintain these terms. Because I get that there is a left position which fully embraces modernity as the solution to a series of problems, right? Some of which are around distribution, that it's better that, let's say, the enlightened left, and I would say I know people like this who are kind of pro-nuclear, they're pro, because they want everybody to have access to everything in that sense, right? Like this idea of red plenty, and nothing is too good for the working man, and that the part of what being on the left is this socialist redistribution of goods.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess for some of those like left modernists, then it's, yeah, they are urban centric in that sense, right? And but I don't know. I don't think that's not a lot of the left either, though. Somehow that's a part of the left. And it's slightly, there's some overlap with a kind of right tech, pro tech, right accelerationist position.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the time there is a sort of just unwillingness to think seriously about supply chains, about food, about where it's coming from. I mean, obviously it would make sense if a country, like I think Britain barely makes maybe around 40 to 60% of its own food, right? And we could be self-sustaining, right? We could make all of our own food and maybe import a tiny bit, like bananas. Students always go mental about bananas when you start talking about
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's always bananas. What about my banana? I mean, I get it. I like bananas too.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense if you think about the contingencies of things. I mean, we saw some of this in COVID with the breakdown of supply chains, and people went absolutely mental. People were like grabbing toilet rolls and losing their mind and like behaving like it was an apocalypse.
Right.
And why not kind of reinvest in your own country and make it self-sustainable and make better food for people, healthier food, and maybe that means slightly less meat sometimes. Maybe that means, more people have access to growing their own food. It is difficult to produce enough to feed even yourself, right? On a small patch. It is difficult, right? Of course, there's going to be some level of you know, the industrialization of production. That doesn't mean that we need to slaughter tens of thousands of chickens in the most grotesque way imaginable whilst they live lives of, unthinkable suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Dave, I know you've got, I think, Wendell Berry's book on you. I just want to add to that really quick and then we can turn it over to you. But
Mm.
something that's always surprised me, like as someone who's vegan, and I don't like to
Yeah.
talk about it because I don't want to be that vegan person. I kind of don't care what other people do or eat. But it has always surprised me, like how few liberal lefty leaning people are vegan or
Mm.
vegetarian or even consider it. It's like I go to the pizza party at the sociology department and there's no thought of like, oh, what if there's a vegan person? We should have an option for them. And that's always surprised me because the people who, say, oh, oppression,
Yeah.
violence, it's like, okay, well, oppression and violence towards animals. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's always been like kind of shocking to me that it's not talked about, that there isn't like a mass vegan or at least anti-animal agriculture strain of the left that is very loud. It's like, okay, you've got PETA and a handful of organizations, and they're kind of annoying. And I don't like to associate with those, but that's always been shocking to me.
Again, yeah, just quickly. I mean, I think there was more of that. I mean, I remember the Animal
Mm.
Liberation Front, who are like kind of crazy actually, like
Yeah.
militant extremists around this thing. They would release animals from animal testing laboratories and possibly did some terrible things. I mean, actually, a lot of our legislation against various action in the UK is because of animal rights protesters. I mean, somebody like Morrissey was a huge figure for
Mhm.
getting a lot of people to think about meat is murder, and so there was that. There used to be that. I mean, now the people I know who are really consistent vegans are rationalists actually.
Mm.
Like
Mm.
some of the effective altruist people are vegan from a reduction in suffering point of view, in that kind of Peter Singerian position, so
Okay.
Right.
but yeah, I don't, I mean, sometimes you meet vegetarians and vegans, but yeah, it's not a consistent part of a political program in the way that you
Hmm.
say. I Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I like that Anne brought in Joel Salatin. I shared a link to an article from the website Homestead Living here in the chat. If you want to pull that up, you can just look at that. But it's just a short article saying that Joel Salatin was appointed advisor to the secretary for the USDA. This is one of the appointments that I think RFK had a lot to do with, make America healthy again. And a lot of people that I know roll their eyes and scoff at this, but also quite a good handful of liberals are saying, well, at least they're focusing on that. At least they're talking about that. And so I think that there is a sort of bipartisan as well as independent sympathy for Maha, because the hospital, I don't know anybody from the last 20 years of my life, and I know a lot of people. I know a lot more people than most people. I don't know anybody who's like had super positive experiences with the hospital outside of like getting a cast for a broken leg, outside of basic bone fixes, which by the way a person could do without becoming a doctor. People could be trained to fix legs without spending that long at the university or in medical school. Um, Outside of those things, it's the bureaucratic red tape. It's the sterilized environments where you're being treated in like dehumanizing ways, where the nurses that make it through med school are the ones who are the most militarized, and the ones with the biggest hearts are often the ones weeded out first, and they become uh, agents for big pharma, using our children and our elders as guinea pigs. And before they were giving people opioids too easily and getting people addicted, something that the companies knew would happen. And now you can't even get pain meds when you need them, right? Because they're going the opposite direction. And so I know somebody who spent his last 3 years screaming, you know, he was the chair of the history department at Boise State. He was a very beloved man. across multiple communities. He studied Southern American history, and that's what he taught. And he spent most of his life in South America, and so he's big in the community for everything related to South America in in Idaho here, but also he was big in the Quaker and Catholic communities, and so it's a very popular man, right? Lots of people came to his funeral. Nothing came up at the funeral about the fact that he spent the last 3 years of his life screaming because they wouldn't give him medications for that, just to deal with his pain, And this is our hospital system today. It's inhumane, and it ruins lives. And I know a lot of people who are more afraid of going to the hospital, not because of the lack of health care, but because of the actual hospital, more afraid of going to the hospital than they are of getting sick. And so in the exact same way, we could talk about food as healthcare, as real healthcare, right? Real food is real healthcare. I know Anne's got some thoughts about good energy, but the reason I have this book in front of me, Wendell Berry's The Unsettling of America, is, first of all, I mean, he's kind of like Christopher Lasch. He's kind of like Ivan Illich. He's kind of like Neil Postman. He's one of these American thinkers who is in dialogue with the New Left, but at the same time called conservative for various reasons, right? So he's a Christian, but he also, he's a farmer from Kansas, and he's I think from Kansas, and he's all about regenerative agriculture in the 70s, at a time when environmentalists were making everything about like, oh, humans shouldn't touch the earth. Humans should isolate themselves from the earth and leave the earth alone and look at it from afar. And this is something that he was really against. And so I'll read a sentence here. He says, the concept of country, homeland, dwelling place becomes simplified as the environment. That is what surrounds us. Once we see our place, our part of the world as surrounding us, we have already made a profound division between it and ourselves. We have given up the understanding, dropped it out of our language and so out of our thought, that we and our country create one another, depend on one another, and are literally part of one another. That our land passes in and out of our bodies, just as our bodies pass in and out of our land. That as we and our land are part of one another, so all who are living are as neighbors here, human and plant and animal, are part of one another, and so cannot possibly flourish alone. That, therefore, our culture must be our response to our place. Our culture and our place are images of each other and inseparable from each other, and so neither can be better than the other. We're supposed to have a deep relationship with the earth, and it's not supposed to be like, oh, there's a handful of people in the relations of production who are responsible for producing the food, and everyone else just lives off of them parasitically. No, it's living with the earth is actually just part of what we're supposed to do. And but one of the things that he tracks is that it's not just capital. He's very critical of capital. He's very critical of the conquistador approach to the earth. He's very critical of this sort of settler mentality. But at the same time, he's saying that exploitative approach to the earth and its inhabitants is not the same thing as stewardship and nurture. And so it's not just capital, though. Like, all my friends will say capital, capital, capital. And of course, I agree with this. But there's also like the state, the managerial, bureaucratic state apparatus making decisions. And there's human beings behind those decisions. And so he focuses on Mr. Butts, the former secretary. I forget secretary to what, but it's in government in the 1970s. Assistant Secretary Richard E. Bell is like this other guy he's talking about. And so both of them, he has a series of quotes from this shift in thinking about food. So it was really the 1970s is the period when we changed the approach to food, and everything became based in a kind of corn that is empty of nutritional content, which is, you think of the omnivore's dilemma and of Food Inc. and all that kind of stuff. Well, a couple of quotes from these guys, I think, will give sort of basis in how he's conceiving of the exploitative mentality. It's not about profit, it's about power. And that's what I really want to hone in on here. So here's some of the quotes, and then I'll pass it back to you all. these guys are saying stuff like true agri-power generates agri-dollars through agricultural exports. True agri-power is the capacity of less than 5% of America's population to feed itself and the remaining 95% with enough food left over to meet market demands of other nations and still provide food assistance for poor people throughout the world. Agri-power should not be a political tool. Feeding people is too serious a matter to be left to political manipulation. They say this out the one side of their mouth while at the exact same time turning right around and saying that food should be a weapon. Okay, so there is like this idea, oh, it's about saving the world, it's about feeding the poor population. This is what we have to do to be able to feed everybody. But then he also has all these quotes from them turning right around and saying, no, it's going to be a weapon. And that's where we started food dumping in South American economies, making it impossible for local farmers in South America to compete with these giant US-backed corporations. These US-backed corporations were able to food dump cheaper products because they were subsidized with government money or with tax dollars, right? So it's artificially cheap. You know, what's being hidden by the lower price of these commodities, so this commodified food, is the actual cost on the health of the soil, which is reduced to dirt, and the cost of our health, which is making it so that we're cut off from any source of good energy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just finished listening to the audiobook of Good Energy by Callie and Casey Means. They at least I believe it was Casey Means who narrated the book and I think wrote most of the book, but they had this experience of working in healthcare in the United States. I believe Casey Means was an ENT, like ear, nose, throat doctor. And just, these people would come in with these chronic sinus infections, chronic issues, and the solution that they were encouraged, almost enforced to offer was surgery and pills. No one was ever asked, okay, well, what are you eating? What's your lifestyle? Let's get to the why of the problem. It's just always let's diagnose and then either intervene surgically or give you some medication. And it was interesting how they talk about in the book, like the nobility that a surgery, that this man, human intervention, and we're gonna slice you open and fix you up. That ethic of intervening in that way was uplifted and kind of seen as this amazing thing. But then now, through whatever bureaucratic processes and profit motives, that's just kind of what healthcare in the US has become. So in the book, they critique, on the one hand, this quick fix approach that never asks and tries to get at the bottom of underlying issues or why someone might be having health problems. Students in medical school are given basically zero nutrition information. So on the one hand, they're looking at that problem. On the other hand, they're looking at kind of what we've been talking about, this crisis of agriculture and the lack of nutrient-dense food. And they argue that like one of the main sources of our poor health in the United States is having bad cellular energy. So like literally our mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, you learn that in, fourth grade science class, is not getting the nutrients that it needs. We're just feeding it carbs and sugar, and we're like just putting shit into our bodies. And so we literally cannot function at full capacity. Our bodies cannot fight diseases. We're constantly inflamed. We are tired and sleepy throughout the day. That's the same thing. But so yeah, they argue that there's not just food, but there's all these different behaviors and practices in our lives that contribute to good energy, to just literally feeling good and functioning at 100%. Getting all the essential nutrients that you need, but also being exposed to the sunlight and putting your feet on the earth and kind of being in touch with this creator and the sunlight that powers and grows our food. sleeping well, sleeping when it's dark, turning off harsh lights at night. But even they get into towards the end, um, like the kind of culture of fear and paranoia that gets created if you're spending too much time on certain areas of the internet and always looking at politics and what's going on in other parts of the world. And they're going to argue that's stressing out your cells, that's stressing out your body and creating an environment where you're not thriving at your fullest capacity. So obviously there's a lack of depth in the book that doesn't get into, structural stultification, or that it does require time and energy and a lot of effort today to fight for your own health and not just go with what, mainstream health and mainstream media suggests that you do. However, I found it to be a really, really insightful book that I'd actually like to get a physical copy and kind of look back over, because it just goes over so much and in the end gives you like all of these ideas on like meals and habits to implement that will kind of set your body up to have a good energy day. And when you have a good energy day, you're not tired throughout the day and you just function better. You're less prone to get sick, to have chronic issues. Yeah, so this idea of a thread throughout that book that is kind of that could be perceived as kind of a woo-woo hippie dippy sentiment of being very much in touch with the earth and the stars and this cosmic energy that created us, being in touch with nature, our nature, the
Mm.
nature outside. um yeah, I love what those siblings are doing, and there's kind of
Oh,
this
they're
like,
siblings.
yeah,
I thought they were married. Oh, okay.
I think they're
I
siblings.
don't I
I
don't know.
think they're
Okay.
siblings. I
Okay.
think so.
Yeah, I mean, one great revelation I had a few years ago was like simply realizing that my health belonged to me, like, and I think
Mm,
if you have like a state health system, like we have the NHS, is obviously you have different problems, like you could say, hey, the NHS is great, it's free at point of use, and it's funded through taxation. But there is a kind of dark side to this too, which is almost like the implication that the state owns your body, like the state owns your health. And I know that a lot of people sort of think that if they get sick, it's not really their responsibility. It's like, and I think this is maybe why health has become right coded, because it once you realize that your health belongs to you and you can make decisions about it, and you don't have to be dependent. You're not dependent on the state, you're not dependent on buying like terrible crap just because it's everywhere and it's advertised to you, and that you actually do have the capacity to choose, and also to choose what to do with your own health. Like, I mean, I had terrible problems with drinking. I had to do all this stuff not to drink, but it was destroying my health, right? And I could choose not to do it, right? And okay, you depend on other people and you get help and blah blah blah, but ultimately, there are better ways of looking after oneself, right? One does not have to be completely nihilistic. And I think a lot of people have just a nihilistic default
mm,
nihilism towards how they interact with the world. Like, oh, this is just the way the world is. I feel bad. I need some sugar or whatever. I'm going to drink. I'm blah blah blah. And it's not. And then the problem becomes, oh, it seems like it's a judgment. Oh, you're making a moral judgment about people's lives. People have tough lives. They're poor. It's like the treat. And but there are deeper questions, and I think this like Make America Healthy Again sort of sees it in that way. Like, this is about the health of the nation, right? Like, of course, people have individual choice. Of course, it's difficult to make decisions when you're low on time and energy and money, and you have to, quickly go somewhere after work or whatever. And it's difficult to then have time to make healthy food. But it's difficult, but it's not impossible. And you can make sort of better decisions. But I think there's this psychological shift almost, like when you're like, actually, I don't want to depend upon the state. I don't want to have to think, oh, if it gets bad or something goes wrong, sure, in an emergency, if there's something that needs fixing, yes, of course, right? Like, of course, there's always going to be the need for healing and so on, but and therefore for medical people. But it can't be the default thing where we think, oh, there must be a pill. Oh, I feel sad. Oh, I've got to take a pill. Or, it's the wrong way around. And it's also about other people. It's like if I'm in a good, healthy state, I am better able to help other people if they need my help. You know what I mean? It's not selfish to care about your health in that way. Like it's not solipsistic or narcissistic or arrogant. And I think I definitely remember sort of thinking at one point of the left, it's like, oh, you know, how do I put it? It's like that caring too much about your health is like narcissistic or something like that. Like it's I don't know, but it's so the wrong way around. Like it's the opposite. It's like if you're in a good place, you can help other people. And
Yeah, be healthy for your kids, be
yeah.
able, like mentally sound, physically functional to help a neighbor if they get hurt. Like Dave's parents had a neighbor who called and she had hurt her knee and they're like, "Okay, we're driving her to the doctor." But also at the end of Good Energy, like Casey Means argues that actually like you might think it's selfish or it's wrong to not be engaged with what's going on politically, but actually having good energy and taking care of myself makes me kind of more grounded and sound and able to address real issues in our culture
Yeah.
and our politics.
I mean, what good politics comes out of feeling terrible? Like none. It's like, oh, I feel guilty and horrible and nihilistic, and therefore my view of the world is completely correct. Like, no.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think like that's the tendency in some of this kind of online leftist activism is like everyone wants to have a chronic illness diagnosis and talk about I have ADHD, autism, this bipolar, whatever. Like that becomes so central to someone's identity is being unhealthy, being unwell. And then it's like, I'm
Mm,
sorry, normal people don't want to listen to the political social advice of people who are like bragging about being unhealthy on the internet. And I think it's that the like destigmatize ethos. We have to destigmatize obesity. We need to destigmatize drug use, destigmatize these things that like are pretty most normal people could say, that's not good for you to be shooting up heroin. That's not good to you for you to be morbidly obese. But the destigmatized nature, I think, has just put people in this state of denial. And now you've got activists who argue you can be healthy at any size, and actually I need a free extra seat on the airplane if I'm morbidly obese. And it's like, I feel for you, but I don't judge you, but that's not good for your bones. It's not good for your body. And yeah, that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think anytime anyone talks about self-discipline or self-control, it's perceived to be, just terribly judgmental and who are you to say and la la la, yeah. But
But
some things are
it's
better
like
for you than others, right? Like it's just,
Yeah.
some things are better than other things, but also we kind of have to have these conversations about what is good. And if we can't have these conversations about what is better or what is
About
quality,
what's right.
about what's right, if we can't have these conversations, um, then we can't lift ourselves up out of our situation, right? Like it takes like a sort of pep talk. We all have to be kind of touching grass and saying, we're, is there are better things, right? Like we can do better things, right? Like there's something better than this, right? Like how? How can we do better? And if we're not having that conversation because people are like, oh, it's judgmental, it's like, well, maybe we just need to not listen to those people. Maybe the people who think that way will get the memo in 10 years. And I think they will. I think that these people are just asleep at the wheel. They're coasting in life, and and so are we a lot of the time, right? Nina gets into this in her piece on stupidity that's coming out in our next volume, right? Stupor. People, you say we all fall into a stupor, right?
Mm-mm.
But the thing is that some people they go into the sort of self-diagnosis astrology world of DSM-5 categories, and then they go and they try to find somebody who will make it official for them so that they can then get pipelined into being a guinea pig for big pharma. And then they tell us that they are their diagnosis and that we have to accept them as their diagnosis. And it's like, okay, uh, I'm sorry, like that's between you and the DSM-5. That's between you and big pharma. That's between you and psychiatry. Like that's not, I'm not going to relate to you as a diagnosis, right? Like I'm going to relate to you as your higher human capacities that you are fighting to salvage from the wreckage of this machine.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can look at that tendency and diagnose it in a different way, right? It is symptomatic. It's symptomatic of a lot of things. It's symptomatic of a loss of relationality and community and a need for attention and the way in which victimhood has kudos and value in some circumstances and so on. And it do you know what I mean? So people are unhappy and unwell in a way, but not in the way that they say they are. You know, that there is a deep kind of social sadness and perhaps an inability to deal with life because life is difficult and life is painful, and we don't have a culture that fully confronts suffering and tragedy. Like people want to avoid it because it's painful, right? So we have a sort of quasi-utilitarian culture, which is like, oh, reduce pain, maximize pleasure, which never, well, I mean, utilitarianism is like one of the most stupid philosophies ever invented, but there is a sort of default utilitarianism at work, I think, in a lot of the way these things are approached. And there's no solace. Like, Christianity gives you solace. It's like, yes, you will suffer, but you'll never suffer as much as Christ, for example. And like you can reflect on that, like, and I think there's a lot of ways in which people are trying to unconsciously or unwittingly assume the position of the victim. It's like, if I can be the perfect victim, then I will be loved, But the thing is, it's like, Christianity solves this problem. Like 2000 years ago, it's like, you will never be the perfect victim. Yes, you will suffer. We all suffer. This is partly what it is to be human, and maybe the most human thing. But you'll never be the perfect victim. You're not Christ. And I think we had an understanding of that even in post-Christian, but culturally Christian societies, and slowly that's become eroded. That people don't want to confront even the difficulty of adolescence, the pain of growing up, the pain of becoming a man or a woman. It's difficult for everybody. It's and it's like, oh, how can we prevent this from happening? How can we stop this suffering? And that just makes it worse. It creates more suffering. This is like confronting reality. We all have to do it. We can't, well, we can live in a stupor, we can stupefy ourselves, we can drink and drug and enter into virtual worlds and delusions and fantasies. And these are all things that human beings are really good at, you know, like we're very, very good at avoiding reality.
Yeah.
This is a perfect segue into the other half of this conversation we were hoping to get into. You brought it up yourself, Christianity. And Anne and I have been having conversations about these different conceptions of God, especially of God and religion or faith and spirituality, that we've been bringing on over the last year and a half at the Underground through the Epic Marathon streams with people of all kinds of different positions. I just got off the phone before this call with Peter Rollins, the thinker of pyrotheology. He kind of takes John Caputo's Death of God theology and Žižekinizes it. He kind of goes post Caputo into Žižek, but also he's actively going to churches on a regular basis. His whole I could almost say ministry, revolves around going into these spaces and working with post-evangelical kinds of tendencies. But there's also actual evangelicals in our lives it's not just post-evangelicals or anti-evangelicals. We also have actual evangelicals who we love dearly in our lives. And it's had us talking a lot about things. And one of the things, our friend and co-host, you do the lack with him, and I do Why Left with him, Benjamin Studebaker, at the end of his lecture on Aquinas, which was pretty recent, that he gave for Theory Underground, he says that there's this tendency for people to have a really simplistic view of, for instance, we'll just say God, but also you could say the left or the right, but any of these kind of big terms, master signifiers. People have a really simplistic view on it, really strong opinion on it, and then because it doesn't really work in reality and their simplistic worldview proves itself wrong over time, they eventually switch to the opposite really simplistic view. Instead of getting more nuanced and thinking more critically and taking themselves to task, they just do this rejection and then switch to the opposite side thing. And so that has me as someone who was wrestling with faith and God and Christianity for a decade and who got really into new atheism when that was a thing and then kind of moved beyond it in various ways, thanks to Kant and Heidegger and Levinas, etc. I've been thinking about this, but Anne's been thinking about it in her own way. And now she's got questions that she wants to kind of ask all of our fellow travelers here at Theory Underground. And so I kind of want to just kick the ball over to you, Anne. All I wanted to do is kind of contextualize it so that you can kind of, uh, swing.
Yeah. I think I've just been really curious in the last couple of years to hear about religion and people's experience with not just religion, but like their relationship to God and Jesus and how they conceptualize it from people who are more intellectual and are also based in philosophy and theory. I grew up like going to church every once in a while. I'd go to vacation Bible school. There was a time when I was really into going to youth group, and there was a time when I really, really wanted to have a relationship with God and with Christ. Like I tried so hard, and I was just like, give me literally anything to know that you exist. And then it was around the time of like middle school when we were reading books about the Holocaust and like the first time that I think I ever really was confronted with tragedy, like real horrific tragedy and real horrific acts of evil that have happened in the past. And then you learn, oh, there's lots of genocides, not just the Holocaust. And I think my own struggling with like I want to believe in God so much and this notion of big sky daddy who loves all of his people and has planned everything and everything happens for a reason. Facing that with learning about these tragedies, I went, well, that God, there's no way that God is real because that God wouldn't allow the Holocaust and XYZ terrible, horrible things to happen. And so now, as I'm, entering a new era in my life and I'm around more people who are religious and Christian and people that I respect and who are deep critical thinkers, who have good hearts, I want to hear more about what role Christianity and religion and God and Jesus plays in your life, how it maybe relates to nature or philosophy or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean it is a good question, and it's a kind of collective question. It's like I meet so many people who are dwelling in this complex of questions really and struggles and yeah, and I think I I mean there's lots of different levels on which this question can operate, right? Like it can be a cultural question, it can be one of inheritance. It's like there is a apparently a big move, especially among young men in Europe, to become Catholic, right? The Catholic Church in the last 2 years has seen a very large number of young men in particular join the church and convert. all kinds of reasons for that, perhaps a desire to reclaim a kind of cultural inheritance, perhaps in the face of, Islam being perceived to be a much stronger religion among people who've moved to different countries. There's this kind of, complex questions there. I mean, these are kind of social, political, cultural questions. I think for me, this question is unsurprisingly partly to do with that, but not really. I think ultimately I have or had a kind of Spinozist intuition, and we're looking at Spinoza on the Nature course, this forthcoming discussion. I'm very excited about it. I think Spinoza is one of these incredible thinkers that really can grip people. And his idea of God as immanent to his creation, so Deus sive natura, God or nature, that there is no difference in a way. There are just different modalities, right? There's the creator and the creation, and the creation is unfolding, and that God is everywhere, and God is us, like we're fragments of God and we're part of nature. And it's a very, very powerful vision, right? Like, and to feel that one is participating in this unfolding is a kind of cure for alienation, potentially. It's a very dynamic, beautiful, aesthetic, cosmic understanding of how things live and how things move, and what a body is, and so on. And I definitely, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm like a good Christian, by the way. Like I go to church regularly. I pray. I sing. I love singing. I absolutely love singing. I love the parish. I love the community stuff. I'm reading the Bible from beginning to end, and I think about it, but actually, weirdly, it's not primarily in terms of my participation, it's not primarily intellectual, right? Like, and that's good. It's good for me also to be not good at something, like not want to be read everything, and be the girly swat. It's like, no, this isn't what this is about. And so being in church, for example, is like very contemplative. The different mode of existing in church when we are there is a big part of it. Like, this is not being in the world in the usual way. Of course, literally, physically, we're in the church near our house, but it's a different modality. And to reflect on these deep questions of suffering, of sin, of our own brokenness. And I think at the level of the anthropology, it makes an awful lot of sense. And I think probably in some ways, that recognition of brokenness somehow is a big part of why I don't know how to put it. I feel that this story is true. that the Christian anthropology is correct. I'm not saying there aren't other ways of understanding the human. Of course there are. There's loads of other ways, chemically, blah blah blah, whatever. But there is something so profound about what Christianity says we are that matches with the reality of the experience of being human. In that sense, that it is, I don't know, I don't want to use the language of function, but that it works. And because it's not the right way of talking about it, right? To talk about it, oh, it works, it's not a machine in that sense, but there is something just, yeah, incredibly resonant about Christianity. And I think partly I started going to church during lockdown because our local vicar, who's a friend of ours, kept the church open against the regulations. And there was something very powerful about that, actually, because it was saying the bureaucratic world is not the world. It's not everything. The world is not a prison. The world is not what the state says it is. That there is this spiritual and religious aspect which is more powerful, in fact. And if you accept the terms of the bureaucratic prison world, then you're trapped in that world, and I just felt that can't be right. Like the bureaucratic prison world is not all there is. Like this is, politics is not all there is. And so it's this also the encounter with this other dimension that is largely buried or that is kind of everywhere, but like constantly sort of disavowed and hidden by the bureaucratic. And I'm a big fan of Illich and Agamben and people who are working in a way, and Heidegger, although Heidegger's an interesting case because in a way he's like the last great pagan philosopher in some ways, I think. But that there is so much truth in some of these ways of seeing the world and to see God in other people, for example, right? How much more beautiful, apart from anything else, is that than to see them as, I don't know, obstacles or numbers on a sheet or bearers of an identity. Do you know what I mean? Like to see other people as fragments of God, as God's children, as God's creation, as people with a soul who can make decisions, who have free will and will make mistakes. I just think, I mean, again, there's a huge aesthetic dimension to this in that sense too. This is a more beautiful way of seeing things. It's not that the less beautiful ways are not true also. And I think being able to hold these different perspectives together somehow without them conflicting, I don't necessarily think they have to conflict, if you see what I mean. And maybe this would be a problem if people are saying, but what about a literal interpretation of the Bible? And what about, what science has shown? I'm just kind of not interested in that way of pitching the battle, if you like. I don't think there's a problem somehow. And an awful lot of very important scientists didn't have a problem also being Christian and also being scientists. You know what I mean? Like it seems like a peculiarly modern way of situating an antagonism.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there's
I
lots of
kind of want to
Yeah.
I kind of want to use this to present a fork and then give you you can go in either way, but and maybe hit on both, but Spinoza was considered a heretic, and I think that most of the Christian people that I know would not like the one-to-one identification between God and nature, and and that does seem pagan as well. So there's that first of all, and of course we'll get more into it, this coming Sunday. Is that right? Is it this coming Sunday or
I
the
think
next
it's
one?
next Sunday.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's not this
yeah.
the 27th, right? Anyway,
Mhm.
so I'm, looking forward to that. I got my copy of the Ethics. I'm trying to read it while moving. It's a little much, but I'm working my way through it. So I'm interested in how you address that, the fact that it does seem heretical, but then I'm also interested in something that, when people think of you, one of the things they'll think about is that you are a controversial figure to associate with. Uh, you, like Russell Brand, are from the UK and have been canceled. And in the course of your persecution over the last decade, have found Christianity. And so recently, people were talking a lot of smack. Oh, look, he gets canceled, and so then he becomes a Christian, and it's a way of switching from one audience to another. It's an opportunistic thing. I'm wondering if you feel. First of all, I wonder if you've gotten any of that. I wonder if people say this kind of thing about you as well. And I'm also kind of just curious about what you think about the Russell Brand situation now with this Me Too thing that's coming up. Um, and yeah, just this kind of Christian Maha sort of turn that he's made as well. Personally, I find it inspiring, and all the people that I'm surrounded by who think he's just a grifter, I'm just like, it's weird to me how they think that they can understand the inner workings of a person like that.
Yeah, I mean, I I mean, first of all, on the heresy point, yes. I mean, definitely. I think I think I have, yeah, part of my ongoing struggle, if you like, is this relationship between a kind of paganism and Christianity. And and but I'm happy, I'm okay with that being an ongoing question, if you see what I mean. Like I think
Yeah.
it doesn't kind of worry me in a certain sense. I think that God's creation, however we conceive of nature, it is God's creation. And I do feel this deep urge to, I don't know, care for, protect, and preserve nature, whatever that means, however obliquely through our discussions around nature. I feel this kind of deep, yeah, affinity also with the strangeness of nature, the fact that it's not perfect, that there's, that it is, I don't know, so sort of wonderful and spiral and fractal and curious, and I'm very, very worried about an image of the world where nature is diminished, right? Like where the world is concreted over and all the trees are, this kind of, I have this definitely terrible fear of that. I don't like the apocalypticism of the environmental movement. I don't think this is the right modality. And I, again, the Wendell Berry is correct. Environment is the wrong word. People don't want to use the word nature, but environment is a terrible word to use. It's sterile. It's not real in that sense. And so, I have problems with some of the other approaches to thinking about nature. And one of the texts I set is a piece by Beth Lord, which is very interesting, which uses Spinoza to reconceive of a kind of nature politics, if you like, that is not the environmental movement. And its sort of tendencies to kind of, yeah, apocalypticism and hysteria. Oh, it's too late. No, I don't think that's true. It doesn't mean that we don't have these questions around stewardship and care and all the things that you were talking about. In fact, we precisely do. On the second question, I don't search my name, so I as part of my self-care, I literally don't know what people say about me unless I have no choice and it comes gets presented to me. So I haven't seen it or heard anyone say have a cynical take. I think if they care at all, I don't know, people who don't like me, they just think I'm mad. So I mean, they would just think, oh, it's another mad thing or something. Probably, I don't know. Um, I think when people convert to Christianity, though, it's often as a consequence of shame or sin or persecution. So in a way, it's like, yes, that's the best time to convert. It's like if you have been dissolute, if you have harmed people, if you have been in very bad places, it's like, yes, that's sort of what Christianity is for. You know what I mean? It's like I completely understand why people convert when terrible things happen to them or they've been terrible, because that's the best time to realize like you know what I mean? Like I say, I'm not cynical about anybody. I think it's great if people become Christian. Of course, we can have endless arguments about denominations and the church and whether the Bible is more important than the structure of the hierarchy and da da da. I'm not so interested in that. I mean, I go to an Anglo-Catholic church, which is a strange sort of fusion, if you like, but it's partly to do with Britain. But it's also what there is. It feels like the right kind of church, given who I am and my background and being Anglo-Irish and whatever. It's like, do you know what I mean? But I'm not so bothered about all of these different arguments, although they are very real. Let's be clear as well. So I don't know. I think that becoming a Christian, I would never question someone's faith, if you see what I mean. Like I would never say, oh, I don't believe that this person is really Christian or something. Like, and I mean, the people who would say that would be people who were not Christian themselves, right? Likely, they would be people seeing the world cynically. And having just read Machiavelli's The Prince, it's like, yes, one can see the world in this way if you want, right? You can see everything through the lens of control, power, manipulation, games. But what a limited way of seeing the world, like you're limiting yourself by by seeing it that way. You know what I mean? It's hard to explain like why cynicism or whatever we want to say is also harmful for the person who is cynical, right? Even if they think that they
Mm.
have a better take, they can see what's really going on. Oh, Russell Brand is just trying to get away from the blah blah blah. Oh, that makes me more intelligent because I'm more cynical. It's like, no, it
Yeah.
doesn't. you know. So I no cynicism from me. I don't know, the Russell Brand thing also, he's been a big kind of guy on TV and stuff for a long time. I mean, but his whole shtick, if you like, his whole character was like, oh, I'm a naughty man, I do drugs and have sex, and in the,
Right.
in the
That's kind of
90s.
the character he's played in the movies, like forgetting Sarah Marshall. He like stole what's his name? I'm forgetting right now, but like this woman, Kristen Bell's character that was kind of, yeah, he was the grungy. I totally had a crush on him when he like in those movie days because he was hot, he was sexy, like
Yeah, and I mean, it's obviously who knows anything about the details, but it does, it's I don't know how to put it. If you're hanging around with Russell Brand getting drunk and high in the 90s, it's like you know what you're doing, it's like you're hanging around with Russell Brand, right? And that world in the 90s like were very hedonistic, and for better or worse, they just were. And so they I don't know if I go like full bore conspiracy, but it does seem like people are going for him because his politics have seemingly changed, and that he is talking about things and yeah, to do with health and other things and Christianity that are not popular from the standpoint of the liberal regime, and of course they have a vested interest in wanting to discredit people. I mean, I have crazy people who want to discredit me all the time. Like, I don't think they're working for the state. I hope not. But if you're that powerful, if you're Russell Brandon, you've got millions of viewers or whatever, of course, like the state or whoever are going to be interested in you, and people are going to want to bring you down. So I think we always have to factor that in whenever people are being attacked and denounced. And also denunciation itself, like the person, we need to be much more aware of like asking the question, who is denouncing this person and why? What are their motives? Like denunciation is not pure. And again, Christianity is extremely clear on this. It's incredible to see how much Christianity is about not throwing the first stone, and that denunciation is absolutely fundamental as a temptation for who we are.
Mm.
We always want to denounce, oh, this other person, is awful, but the denunciation itself is also a problem. It's also a sin, potentially. You know what I mean? The
Mm.
denouncer is not. And we've forgotten some of these lessons. Like we just think, oh, this person says they're a victim, therefore they are, right? And I'm not saying that there aren't victims. I'm not saying that people aren't hurt. We hurt each other all the time, right? I've been hurt, you've been hurt, we've hurt people, blah, blah, blah. It's not to deny that reality at all, but it's to say that whenever there is a denunciation going on, that we need to be really, really, really careful about it, because
Right.
it's so tempting to become part of the mob, to join in.
right.
Righteous, anger, this person did or said something terrible, and that, to be clear, I think that partly becoming Christian was because of my experiences of being denounced and mobbed. It did contribute. I'm not gonna lie. It made me see the world differently. And I think paradoxically or even perversely, it made me more hopeful. Oddly, it's very hard
Right.
to explain how these terrible things, or like these very brutal, losing all your friends and work and stuff, and being mobbed, however virtually, or being
Yeah.
kind of harassed by specific individuals for years on end. It's very hard to explain how that could result in a hopeful worldview, but
I,
somehow.
I, I think that's super relatable because it makes you appreciate people who are above that kind of stuff, or, and more importantly, uh, members of a community of grace, right? And
Mhm.
so Christianity's got a monopoly on communities of grace. Of course, it also has a lot of hypocrites and it has a lot of blah, blah, blah. It has its own sort of Pharisees, right? But Christianity in its essence was against the Pharisees, which were the legalistic kinds of people who are more about that than they are about, as Paul, really focuses on in his work, grace. And so I know Anne's got some thoughts on this because she read Russell Brand's Bookie Wookie back before before all of this stuff happened. So she was already very clued into what his lifestyle was like back then. But I'll just say, as a 90s kid who was, I guess, I mean, I come from the 90s, but also, my hedonistic phase was a little bit more 2000, I don't know, 2005 through 2013. We'll probably say that's the range there. Um, and most of that was before a lot of the internet stuff, and definitely before it got into cancel culture, and definitely before the alternative music scenes kind of turned cannibalistic and got into woke stuff. And so, in that period, yeah, there was a lot of sex. And and I remember during Me Too being like, oh, Harvey Weinstein, what a piece of shit. And then being like, wow, this Me Too thing is awesome. And you know what? If a few eggs gonna have to get broken to make an omelet, if there's to be some casualties of war, then so be it. But then when I saw what happened to Louis C.K. and Ozzy Ansari, I was like, oh, well, I'm screwed then, because these guys. Okay, so Louis C.K. he was consensually, like, he was consensually doing stuff with people. Same thing with Ozzy Ansari. And when I realized that the Me Too thing was going into this sort of, oh, well, if a woman feels icky about it later, then it can retroactively be something that's public and people can talk about it and use it for shaming. And I was like, well, I can imagine a lot of people I've been with might regret it after the fact. Shit, maybe not like the day after, but like, maybe they get married and they start settling down and they're like, well, maybe Dave shouldn't have put the moves on me on the third date. Maybe he should have waited like a bit longer. He wasn't a gentleman, and oh, that was a little fast, and it's like, or they really regret their party phase, right? That's a much more, I think, common thing, is to regret the lifestyle itself, but then you fetishize it by pinning it on a person, and then you try to scapegoat an entire cultural moment onto individuals. And so, yeah, I've definitely felt like, oh, well, that's going to come get me. And in its own ways, people have tried to make these kinds of points. It doesn't really work, but I guess my heart goes out to him because he is under that sort of pressure. It's like Giorgio Agamben took a position against the lockdowns, and he received an insane amount of backlash in the sort of ivory tower. But Russell
Yeah.
Brand's out here doing it in the media, and he's a celebrity, and it's a lot different for him than it is for Agamben. So
Mhm.
I think it's not a coincidence that him being against the lockdowns has precedes this new cancellation.
Right, and being like a critic of the left and increasingly more conservative, or saying conservative talking points that doesn't make someone a conservative, but if we put it in that language, like, yeah, that's obviously going to get him backlash from the very people who do this kind of, public denunciation, shaming, canceling for things that happened so long ago. And that is such an interesting issue that, for whatever reason it's arising, whether if it is kind of a lack of any sort of like grounding in faith or Christianity, and realizing, hey, we're all sinners, we've all made mistakes in the past, we're going to continue to make mistakes, giving not only like the people in our lives grace, but ourselves grace, and accepting grace and forgiveness from God, like that. Just see, whether it's from a Christian view or a secular view of just like forgiving people and realizing that we're not perfect, it seems to be gone. And so people are gonna go after, oh, he did this thing years ago and it was kind of popular to do this thing, and therefore he's still bad today and needs to pay for the actions of an old self, or of a self that wasn't making the right choices. And he's probably still, like, none of us are always making the right choices, but this need to go to someone's past and
Yeah, I mean,
denounce them for their
yeah,
past is so, it's so wrong. It's so icky because, okay, is your past perfect? Is anyone's past perfect? No, we've all done things we regret. I stole something from Disneyland one time when I was like 6 because I thought because it was on the ground in the store that meant I could have it. Like, I'm not proud of
oh,
that moment, listen, but
that's so sweet.
I'm not like, oh my gosh, I'm a thief. Like I've
No, of
moved on,
course.
I've forgiven myself, I've learned from it, like learning from our mistakes. And I think some of that maybe like my own struggle with forgiving myself and giving myself grace, I think comes from kind of my heavy institutionalization in the schooling system and internalizing grades and praise from teachers, and I need to be perfect all the time at the right time to get into the right college, to get respect from my peers for XYZ thing. So maybe there is this like the fact that we are also heavily schooled and conditioned that like we have to be perfect right
Yeah.
now. We have to get the A right now. Like I think there's a lot of factors that contribute to needing everyone to be perfect at the right time, and feeling shame in yourself and then projecting that shame onto other people when
Yeah.
they're not perfect the first time. But yeah, the going into the past is so interesting.
Yeah, and I think, these deep, horrible things that motivate all of us sometimes, like envy as well. I mean, if somebody's famous and they've got success and money and you haven't, and you had an interaction with them 20 years ago and you're like, my life didn't turn out so great. It's like, well, I can, I mean, the incentives are quite strong, right? To tie yourself to this person and say, they did this terrible thing and get some money and get some recognition and attention. And it's also messy and these things, they're never clean, right? None of these things are like straightforward, right? They're all two sides to every story. And it's and none of this has anything to do with the law usually, right? Like this is all happening in this kind of gray zone of like post-Christian moral judgment on the internet, right? We're not necessarily talking about trials or whatever. It's some other, but then it's not metaphysically grounded. It's like, well, you're a liberal subject too, right? Like on what basis are you making these claims? Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Mhm.
why do you think that these things are immoral when you have no moral system?
Mm.
Um, it's it's yeah, but this loss of room for forgiveness and acceptance of forgiveness and moving on, I think. It's like the internet never forgets, right? It's like, this is part of the horror of it, really. But yeah, I mean, it's possible to change your life. Let's put it this way. You must change your life, as someone said.
Yeah.
Well, Lena, thank you so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to your lecture on the 27th, and uh, excited to follow your own evolution here. I know it's a process. It's not something that you're finished with, and we're also, very aware that we are in transition between modes and places and stuff like that. And so
Mhm.
it's nice to touch base with you here.
Yes. Yes, and I wish you both the best of luck with your
Thank
shifting,
you.
transitional pro country return to nature.
Thank
Um,
you. Yeah, I want to skip to that part and avoid the moving and packing and cleaning. That's the part I'm like, oh, after this call, I have to like do stuff. Ugh.
you can do it. Still worth
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. Turn on some garbage entertainment podcast and just get to it.
Yes.
The Unsettling of America, now available on Audible as of yesterday. I've checked every couple of weeks for the last like 8 years, and it's
Oh,
officially
wow.
available on Audible. So yeah, go check it out, folks. It's free, I
Nice.
think. I don't it didn't even require a credit. It's just up there now.
Huh.
So definitely check it
Cool.
out. All right, Nina, thank you so much. Everybody, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care.
Yeah.
Guys.
Boom, 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 boom.
Boom, 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 shakalaka, boom.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 Core Concepts and the Fundamental Problems with the Situation Today with social theorist David McKerracher, 12 Essential Political Thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and The Philosophy of Nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McKerracher, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research.
If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching. Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be 2 kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn. I hope you have fun.